Welcome to episode 17 of Project 250, a weekly chronicle of the people, places, and events of the American Revolution in the order they occurred. So, without further ado, here's what was happening 250 years ago this week, April 27th to May 3rd, 1775. Last week, as you may recall, people in Massachusetts were grappling with the aftermath of the battles of Lexington and Concord. During this time, the responsibility for governance largely fell to the Massachusetts Provincial Congress and its president, John Hancock. General Artemas War was involved in both digging entrenchments and addressing a serious shortage of gunpowder. Messengers bearing news of Lexington and Concord reached Hartford, Connecticut, on April 20th. Meanwhile, New York's First Provincial Congress convened to select delegates to the Second Continental Congress. On April 21st in Charleston, a secret committee, led by William Henry Drayton, conducted raids on several local powder magazines, seizing muskets, cutlasses, cartridge boxes, as well as match and gun flints. In Williamsburg, Virginia, on the same day, an event known as the Gunpowder Incident unfolded. Local citizens, outraged by Governor Dunmore's seizure of gunpowder from the Williamsburg magazine, gathered outside the governor's palace and threatened Dunmore with violence if the powder was not returned. On April 22nd, the Rhode Island legislature voted to send a force of about 1,500 men to Massachusetts to support the colonial forces besieging Boston. Also on April 22nd, in New Haven, Connecticut, Captain Benedict Arnold confronted David Webster, the local militia colonel, to secure the keys to the local powder magazine. Arnold then marched his men to join the rebel forces at Cambridge. On April 23rd, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress called for an additional 30,000 volunteers, with 13,300 to be raised immediately. At 5 p.m., on April 24th, news of Lexington and Concord reached Philadelphia. At the end of the week, Captain John Parker gave a deposition regarding the battles at Lexington and Concord. Turning to the events of this week, news of the battles of Lexington and Concord continued to spread, reaching as far south as Williamsburg, Virginia, by April 28th. The following day, April 29th, the Committee of Correspondence in Williamsburg made a formal announcement about Lexington and Concord. They directly quoted William Pitt's speech from January 20th, warning that the very first drop of blood that is spilled will not be easily healed. It will be irritable vulnus, a wound of that rancorous and festering kind, that in all probability will mortify the whole body. Also on April 29th, in Philadelphia, John Dickinson wrote a letter to Arthur Lee, who had succeeded Benjamin Franklin as Massachusetts Special Envoy in London, which included an unverified account of the affairs at Lexington and Concord. In addition to repeating false reports of Lord Percy's death, Dickinson declared,
"The impious war against innocence has commenced in the neighborhood of Boston."
Dickinson went on to ask,
"What topics of reconciliation are now left for men who think, as I do, to address our countrymen? To recommend reverence for the monarch or affection for the mother country? While we revere and love our mother country, her sword is opening our veins."
Despite the lies told by the king's ministers,
"We are a united, resolved people, with well-armed and disciplined troops, and we shall soon have good officers."
Later that same day, April 29th, Captain Benedict Arnold and his New Haven volunteers reached the rebel encampment at Cambridge, Massachusetts. On April 30th, Joseph Warren, President pro tempore of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, which was then meeting at Watertown, urged his colleagues to act swiftly in response to the battles of Lexington and Concord. Warren emphasized the importance of raising troops and encouraging enlistments in anticipation of future military engagements. On the same day, the Provincial Congress reached an agreement with General Thomas Gage, allowing civilians to enter and leave occupied Boston. Furthermore, on May 1st, the Provincial Congress passed a resolution to provide public assistance to Boston inhabitants who wished to leave the city. On May 2nd, Abigail Adams wrote to Mercy Otis Warren about the events at Lexington and Concord and the troubling state of affairs in Massachusetts, saying,
"What a scene has opened upon us, such as we never before experienced and could scarcely have imagined. If we look back, we are amazed at what is past. If we look forward, we must shudder at the view. Our only comfort lies in the justice of our cause."
Abigail expressed concern for friends and relatives risking their lives and property for the cause, praying that God would give them wisdom and integrity sufficient to the great cause in which they are engaged. Abigail noted how much she missed Mercy, and especially her better half, her husband John. In addition, Abigail mentioned that there had been several alarms involving warships that forced Colonel Josiah Quincy's family to flee from their home multiple times. As for those individuals who remained in occupied Boston, she said,
"What course they can take I know not. I believe they are kept in for security to the troops."
Abigail feared that their current circumstances might lead them to act in ways that could be inconsistent with their honor. Abigail concluded her letter by mourning the loss of Britain's former glory and lamenting the violence against their own people, stating,
"O Britain, how is thy glory vanished? How are thy annals stained with the blood of thy children?"
On that same day, May 2nd, Abigail's husband, John Adams, on his way to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress, wrote from Hartford, Connecticut. John reported that Connecticut was in the process of raising 6,000 men, while Rhode Island was sending 1,500 to Massachusetts. Additionally, New York had closed its port, taken control of the customs house, arms, and ammunition, called a provincial congress, and agreed to support the decisions of the Continental and Provincial Congresses, all of which left the Tories, quote, humbled in the dust. John concluded by asking Abigail whether either of his brothers were seeking a military command. John would offer no advice on the matter, but would leave that decision to their judgment. If either of them were interested in a field command, they should contact Colonel Joseph Palmer of the Massachusetts Militia and Dr. Joseph Warren soon. The following day, May 3rd, at Cambridge, Benedict Arnold, recently arrived from New Haven, approached the Massachusetts Committee of Safety with a proposal to launch an expedition against Fort Ticonderoga. Arnold had learned of the situation at Ticonderoga during his march to Cambridge from Colonel Samuel Holden Parsons, who was on his way to Hartford to recruit volunteers for his own expedition against the fort. Located on the western shore of Lake Champlain in upstate New York, the fort had once been a key element in defending the region against invasion from Canada. Since the end of the French and Indian War, Ticonderoga had fallen into disrepair. By 1775, the fort was garrisoned by only a small detachment of 48 officers and enlisted men. Despite its decline, Fort Ticonderoga still contained, within its walls, a collection of heavy artillery that the Americans sorely needed, along with other military supplies found at the lightly defended fort. This made it too tempting a target to pass up. The Committee of Safety needed little convincing and quickly granted Arnold a commission as Colonel of Militia and authorized him to raise a force of 400 volunteers. Arnold was instructed to capture the fort, take possession of the artillery and other supplies located there, and ship back to Massachusetts anything he thought might be useful. In granting Arnold the commission, the committee attached one stipulation. This was to be a special commission for a secret service. As a result, The committee reserved the right to disband Arnold's force and revoke his commission whenever they thought necessary. Despite these conditions, Arnold left for Ticonderoga immediately, accompanied by two captains, Eleazar Oswald and Jonathan Brown, who were tasked with raising new recruits. In the meantime, Arnold was not the only one who had his eye on Ticonderoga. In Connecticut, Captain Edward Mott had been chosen to command Parsons' expedition, while Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys were also recruited from the New Hampshire grants. On May 3rd, the same date that Arnold set out from Cambridge, Mott and Allen rendezvoused at Bennington. Also on May 3rd, Virginia's governor, Lord Dunmore, prompted by the recent gunpowder incident, issued a cease and desist order against all militias attempting to march on Williamsburg, and specifically targeting Patrick Henry's Hanover militia, then encamped near Doncastle's Ordinary, north of the capital. In his order, Dunmore called on Virginians to suppress the spirit of faction, which then prevailed among the people. Anticipating an attack on Williamsburg, Dunmore hastily prepared for battle. Captain George Montague of the HMS Foy led 43 men armed with swords, cutlasses, and bayonets, but no muskets, to the governor's palace where they joined Dunmore's improvised force of armed servants. As a precaution, Dunmore placed cannon in front of the palace and threatened to fire on the town if Henry's troops attempted to enter the capital. At this point, Carter Braxton, local merchant, planter, and grandson of Robert King Carter, offered to ride to Williamsburg and try to persuade Richard Corbin, his father-in-law, to authorize payment for the confiscated gunpowder. Braxton's effort succeeded, at least for the moment, as Henry agreed to wait for the outcome of Braxton's negotiations. Eventually, Henry agreed to accept a payment of £330 as compensation for the confiscated gunpowder, which Henry pledged to donate to Virginia's delegation in Congress, who would use it to purchase gunpowder in Philadelphia. On that same day, Lord Dunmore, worried for his family's safety, removed them from the governor's palace to his hunting lodge, Portobello, located north of Queens Creek in York County. And that's the way it was 250 years ago this week. If you enjoyed this video, please tell a friend. And if you like what you see on this channel, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter, or X, as well as on Substack. Thank you for watching.